and thank you for staying behind us for the Q&A. So I might just start with you, David, to explain what you do and your relevance to the play.
Okay, so hi, my name's David. I invented the word chemsex and started that sort of movement in regards to a public health and community response. And is Chris in the audience?
Yes.
And Chris, who is the writer, invited me a long time ago to for a reading of the play in its very early stages about 3 years ago. And so I've been a little bit involved, that very lucky thing, in the process of it being on stage for you today.
There is even a character that is based on David.
Oh yeah.
So you might. Yes, the Australian one. So, and Dorota, this is the first time you've seen Tumulus?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, but if you could just tell us about what you do in the relationships and chemsex arena.
Of course. So I had a pleasure some years ago to work with David for 56 Dean Street. I'm a psychosexual counsellor, and I see individuals and couples struggling very often with sex-related issues and intimacy issues. I predominantly see in my private practice as in therapy, I see predominantly same-sex couples, and I must say that vast majority are coming and the chemsex comes up very often as a huge contributing factor to how it affects people relationships and their relationship with sex and with intimacy. So this is what I do, and that's why it was extremely relevant for me. Thank you very much for having me here.
No, really appreciate both of you being here, and I think you'll both give us different perspectives and help us also understand, some of the things to contextualise what Chris has written within the script. Because that's certainly what drew me to the play, is that it approaches a subject that I didn't know much about, but really makes it relevant and understandable. But I hope you guys will give a lot more background information to it. So I think, starting on what you touched upon, relationships, intimacy, and I think you can both speak about how chemsex and addiction impacts upon that. What's been the experience?
The noise was my favourite bit.
Yes. Would you like to explain what the noise is, or what the noise is to you?
Nicely asked, because I think this probably is different to everybody. Probably all interpret it in your own way. I'm curious to know what they'll think a bit later. For me, it's in regard to chemsex and the noise. The noise is when you're lying in bed and someone's trying to have sex with you. I can put it better than that. When you're lying in bed and having sex with someone, and the noise in your head is, what do I do in reciprocation? How long do I stay in this position for? Is my dick hard? Have I douched today? What is he expecting of me? Who will be top? Who will be bottom? Can he see how ugly I really am? What do I do next? And can he see through this performance that I'm giving him? La 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 la. That's the noise that is that a lot of the guys I work with talk to me about. And of course you do chems, and that noise just shuts up, and you can just enjoy the sex. Okay. What does it mean to you?
Well, it's very interesting because the play has so many layers, right? It's essentially crime story, right? And but also an addiction story. I saw it as a intimacy, search for intimacy, or a struggle with the attachment that the main character seemed to formulate to the guy, or a fantasy of a guy, we don't know, who he was seeing for some time, and now he's suffering loss from it, and he's trying to make sense of what the intimacy really is. My favorite bit, apart from at the very beginning, he says something about once I take these 2 drops, I feel like I know them all. When he comes to the chill out, the first chill out, right? And he says, there's this overwhelming sense of me being attractive, but also I know intimate world of all of them. And I was thinking, I hear that so often in my therapy room of people saying that was original attraction, the search for the connection. It wasn't about sex as much as about high, as much as it was about being with someone. It was interesting for me when the main character got back to it while investigating the crime, and he asked to be held. And the meaning of it is so powerful for many people, because the body-to-body contact, where actually doesn't require physical attractiveness or acrobation and being skillful at sex and what have you. It's just intimacy of being held, being together. This body-to-body contact, breathing and just being together is something that we all really want, but we don't know really maybe how to get it. And I found this character is searching for something, and he was very lost. So I was actually very moved by this part of it. And not absolutely dismissing the addiction bit, but being really in tune with his struggle to actually defend from the attachment. But this guy, George, became really powerful for him, and that is really something that I feel my clients are telling me very, very often.
Okay.
So the camps, interestingly, I think that on the surface they are a promise of deeper connection and meeting someone and creating something super special, but actually they're just facilitating the illusion because we're not ourselves. It's extremely hard. I don't know, maybe you disagree. Yeah. Okay.
So you're both dealing with people on different levels, with different experiences that have some form of addiction, to chems. How is that treated? How, and do people overcome the addiction? Can you tell us more about that?
Well, we do really different jobs, but with the same group.
Yeah.
So the way I see it, you can give your version up, I guess, but the way I see it with a drugs worker or a social worker or a chems advisor, I guess is another title, is when someone's reflecting on their use, and they either want to get some harm reduction information to learn how to be more safe, perhaps some safer injecting information on how to do the drugs without overdosing and just information to be safe, or it might be wanting to make some changes like how do I'm using every weekend, but I only want to be using every month. But every time I try to do this, I end up using every weekend, and I need help to put some boundaries around that. And there's stuff that goes on in our head when we're wanting to do drugs, like having a craving, where it rules out your normal judgment. So if I want to make a practical decision about whether it's a good idea to do drugs today, that can be really hard to do if I'm in a hyper anxiety emotional state because the drugs are conflicting my brain and all this kind of stuff. So drugs work helps somebody manage those symptoms every single week so that they can achieve the goals they want to achieve for the following 7 days. And when things are more complex, then they might need some more complex therapy, and that's when someone like Dorota might come along.
Or very often my work follows David's work, because then people are more ready after the addiction part of it is more under control and more manageable. The use is more manageable, and people are having a little bit better relationship with chems. Then they can think with me a little bit deeper about what the role of chems really is within their life or their relationship dynamic. And if they wish to modify this, and as I said, vast majority wishes to explore, at least have an experience of some sober sex or sober intimacy. And this is where I sort of step in.
What's the main character's name again?
Anthony.
Anthony. So in the context of the play, Anthony might find that he's using a lot, and if he decided to come forward and get some help from someone like me, it would be how frequently do you want to be using, or what are you finding the issues are, or when did you last have sober sex, or what do you like about the chems and dislike about them. And if something came up like it was about loss or bereavement from the dead character's name? George.
Yeah.
That's something that a drugs worker wouldn't do. That's something that a psychosexual therapist might manage. Not any kind of therapist might manage.
Yeah.
Fabulous. All right. Now, do we have any questions from the audience?
I'm curious to know what the noise meant to you, if it meant something different. Did anyone interpret the noise differently than I explained it?
Yes, to me it was more of a side effect of the drugs, that it was a real noise, but the way you explained it was more of your own subconscious giving you the voices towards it. So, but on the play, or like, this is the first time I've ever heard of chemsex, by the way. So to me in the play it was just actual like noise created by a side effect of the drugs, or you gave it a different
That's a very
information.
real thing. Drug-induced psychosis is really common with chemsex, and it's usually, it can be actual voices, actual human voices sort of being really, what's the word? Not detrimental, being really accusatory, like, you failed at that, you're awful, you're ugly, they don't like you, you should leave this chemsex party, you're not wanted. That can be a very real thing that people experience, but also just the noise of, everyone kind of judges themselves really harshly on a drug come down, don't they? Really harshly. Go on.
Can I say a follow-up question? I'm trying to understand. Do they take the chemical, the drugs, to find themselves more open to relationships, or is it more to heighten the actual orgasm, or does it do both? What does the drugs do?
I was actually thinking about when you said this is the very first time when I heard the word chemsex, and we've got inventor of this word just now sitting here on the stage. Will that be helpful to explain to people what chemsex really means? Would you be kind enough to tell a little bit about it?
Yeah. Thank you. Yes. Okay. So, in the late 1800s, a large number of Asian people moved from Asia to California for the gold rush, the California gold mining rush, and they brought with them a lot of opium, and suddenly there was an opium epidemic in California in the early 1900s. It led to opium dens existing above Chinese laundries and all these kinds of things. And if you and I were to go in there and help people with an opium problem, we'd have to understand, what does opium feel like? How do people behave on it? What's the issues that make someone attracted to that kind of high specifically? And I think we'd have to understand the context, like being the racism towards Asian people in California around that time in history, about how it was very underground at the time and associated with Chinese culture, and the way that American culture dealt with it. You have to understand the epidemic culturally. Jump forward some decades and you've got the African American crack cocaine epidemic, which is very much about racism. It's about injustices within the criminal justice system. It's about Ronald Reagan saying crack is a black person's problem. So if we're going to help try to understand that drug use epidemic, we have to understand all of those cultural factors too. We've got a current heroin epidemic. You might have seen some homeless people on your way to the theatre today who are immersed in homelessness and poverty and crime, and heroin is the drug that works well in that demographic. And to support that, we have particular services. And chemsex is a different kind of epidemic. So it's about particular drugs that have a different kind of high. So we feel sexier on certain drugs than on others. You know, people don't do heroin to go out and have a laugh. They don't do heroin to go out shagging or to go clubbing. It serves a very distinct purpose. Chems, crystal meth, methadone, and G, really impact the experience of sex and connection better than most other drugs, and they're really widely available to a population of people, which is gay men on apps like Grindr, who really need some help, because gay sex has been ruined by an AIDS epidemic, complicated medicine and HIV prevention methods, stigma, by societal homophobia. No religions are very kind, not many religions are very kind to gay sex. So gay sex is really complicated in modern times. More complicated because of the way apps work and tribes that exist within gay culture, the drugs that are very widely available, the particular side effects from these particular drugs, because these aren't ecstasy, these are really hardcore dangerous drugs that cause psychosis and stuff. And so that's chemsex. It has a name, and we don't want to be sending these people to heroin services. We need services that are designed for that culture, where people within the chemsex support services understand the culture of gay sex, HIV stigma. And that's why chemsex needs to be a movement and a different kind of healthcare response. That's why I needed a word to describe it. And that's your lecture on chemsex for today.
All right, any other questions?
Can I just ask, when did you coin the phrase chemsex? Is it something that is recent times that you spoke about the history of it, but sitting here as I'm a non-gay woman, I've never heard of it, I don't know anything about it, and I feel really square right now. So is it something that's going on now?
So people have used drugs and alcohol, all kinds of people have used drugs and alcohol for sex for centuries and centuries and centuries. but again, it's about the culture. So at the moment, we've got a sexual technological drug use revolution happening within gay communities around the world. Like, gay men have been using ecstasy for ages, and if you and I were going to have sex on ecstasy, we would kiss a lot, and your skin would feel amazing under my fingertips, and I'd feel very connected to you, and I'd care about you enormously and your well-being. I would tell you my whole life story, and I'd be really interested to hear yours. And the sex we'd have would be really connected, and that's not chemsex, that's sex on ecstasy, and it's kind of nice and not associated with a great deal of harm in real life or according to literature, research. Chemsex is something specific, it needed a name. It was coined in around about 2002, and it wasn't a healthcare thing, it was just, I used to do a lot of chemsex, and we called ourselves Chemsex Club. And we were not talking about ecstasy use, we were talking about a very new phenomenon of chems, those three drugs, that suddenly, overnight, changed the drug use within our culture from ecstasy, cocaine, and sort of dancing and fun to a very sexual-based kind of epidemic that had a lot of consequences. And chemsex kills 2 gay men a month in London at the moment, and in some cities around the world too. And that was never happening with ecstasy or alcohol or stuff like that. So it's a modern phenomenon associated with some modern gay cultural trends.
Can I just add one footnote that I think one of the best lines in the play was that heterosexual men are allowed to let themselves go. Yeah, brilliant. Best line. Yeah.
The writer is laughing at your
Okay, question off the back.
Could chemsex exist without Grindr?
Could chemsex exist without Grindr? Yeah, I believe so. I think that, you know, what David is raising is another prejudice that specific population is dealing with. And, you know, when we need some kind of inhibitors to feel good again and forget about all these judgmental voices and how inadequate we feel living in a very heteronormative society where, you know, the sort of unachievable fantasy of Disney life is making us feel awful and ugly and bad, and we striving for something that perhaps never exists. So if there is something out there that can for a moment stop feeling off, feeling inadequate, we're going to find a way to get it. But the Grindr facilitates that perfectly, you know, because it's just so easy accessible. What do you think?
I agree with everything you said. I think the role of Grindr in chemsex, Grindr and those apps, is the proliferation of drugs. Traditionally, drug epidemics are geographical, and if my sister was going to come to London and if I was going to worry about her developing a drug problem, the pathway is getting off the plane, getting a job, finding somewhere to live, being introduced to a real network of friends. One of those friends within a month offers her a drug. She might like it, she might not. We had the same parents, so she knows she's going to like the drug. And a month later, she's offered the drug again. A month later, she's offered the drug again, but this time with an introduction to a dealer. And a problem might or might not start developing in just a short amount of time, like a couple of months in a city like London. If my younger gay brother comes to London, he gets off the plane, he's on Grindr before he hits the tarmac, and he's being offered these drugs, these hardcore drugs, for free in a sexy environment that helps him overcome being new in a city on the same day. And that's the fastest introduction to really hardcore drugs that this very vulnerable, that any population has ever had in the history of the planet. And that's the role that apps have played in chemsex and why it's become so widespread. There's so many people that can handle those drugs, there's so many people that can't, and everyone's being introduced to them and being sent to heroin services where they don't understand the gay sex part of it. That's my long answer.
We've got a question up the back.
Yes. Can I add Uber to the app as well? Because that is another key enabler that moves dealers and people from one venue to another.
There was a really good article about that, actually, yeah.
My question, as someone who is not yet 59, is about demographics. I really enjoyed the play. I particularly identified with the inability of the police to deal with some elements of this, and having been exposed to some of the other criminal aspects that go on, I know they are limited in how we deal with it. But set in northwest London, I was two experienced professionals here. I've been involved in group work where I've often found myself the dad of the group. So what does the demographic look like, both ethnic and age, and is it changing?
Well, I find that the camps don't discriminate. They're actually everywhere, really. And in terms of the population, I think across all the ages and all the races. If we're talking about, the gay population, I've got couples in their 20s and in their 50s, and I think that was a beautiful illustration in a play, because you met so many of these characters doing all these posh jobs and awful jobs, being able to afford the extremely nice Hampstead Heath apartment versus the guy who can't pay the rent. That's actually reality. I find that that's the reality. So I do not particularly see the very specific demographic, either age-wise or, education-wise or status-wise or race-wise. I'm not sure if that's accurate for what you see.
We have 4,000 guys coming every month to the clinic I work in, 5016 Street, who use chems for sex. Not all needing help with them, but they're coming for various reasons. So in London, 15 years ago, when we first started doing this work, it looked like it was older, white, HIV positive gay men that were mostly doing this. But that was the early days, and I think a lot of HIV positive people attend clinic more and healthcare appointments kind of more easily and more regularly anyway, so perhaps we've seen it change since then, and I agree with you. It's pretty, if you're gay and you're lucky enough to have a really good relationship to your sex and sexiness and your community and how to get it and find it, deliver it, and kind of exist within it, then great, you're probably not going to develop a big problem with chemsex, but it taps into nearly everybody else. In places like America, it's very, very much about black, gay and Latinx gay men. And it's really devastating those communities, and there's not a lot of appropriate support. And it's a very racist thing in parts of America, particularly the southern states. In Asia, it's across the board, and in London, a big city like this, it's HIV positive and negative equally, and it's all different races. And the thing I do notice is when a black gay man is accessing help, there's not that group are not disproportionately affected in numbers, but you can feel how something about being raised in a very religious or evangelical family, or with the masculine culture that is required of black men sometimes in some cultures, really impacts the experience of chemsex really badly, in a mental health kind of way.
But you know what made me wonder right now when you said this? I became aware that we are talking about hate and maybe crime a little bit as well. It was in the play, but we've been talking both about prejudice or racism or hatred in so many levels, that I think that this population is very fragile and very exposed to all this, not only heteronormative judgments, but also hates from the society, but within the gay population themselves, right? I like the end of the play when Anthony was left with the chain because he turned into murderer. And I was thinking about and having the voices of a few of my clients telling me about their experience of being treated on a chill out when you are rejected to enter the party because there is a face control. So if you're not attractive enough, you can't access a certain sort of gathering. I'm being euphemistic. But this is it. And I was thinking a little bit about, what a tragedy that really guys who grew up very often being hyper-vigilant about the secret that they held in for such a long time until they decide to come out, they now become persecutors themselves, doing very often something within the brotherhood that shouldn't really happen. And I'm always puzzled about this. And I'm not sure why I'm directing these questions to you. Maybe I need to just
I'm
ask.
a gay man. I'm very gay.
So tell me, what's that about?
You can turn within the gay community.
Yeah, I mean,
You can do that better than me, I think. Why does or if anyone is anyone in the audience has got an opinion about why within the community we can be so unkind to each other on social media, in the bedrooms, rejectful, no camps, no femmes, no blacks, no Asians?
Can I just say, love the production. I had the pleasure of doing really well. There was a line in the play where it said about self-preservation,
got it on the head, yes.
It's not in control then.
An example I have, for instance, is I'm 52. So when I was younger, you could not be effeminate. The consequences, being caught being effeminate, were really dire on the school playground, in my own family. You know, my mum and dad didn't like it. To this day, my sister says, "Stop being so camp, David." And I keep reminding her that I like my campness. Okay, but you know, so this is how you go. So I became to act very straight. So when I would see a camp man when I was 32 years old on gaydar or somewhere in the streets, I'm like, ugh. You know, I had an impulsive reaction to that's an unattractive thing in every way, because it's had such an emotional impact on me. Femininity and masculinity was life or death important to me. So I began to find it really unattractive, and I might have said so or rejected people because of it. You know, now I find it gorgeous, and I think the queer movement in modern times is helping other people my age to come to terms with things like that. So that's just kind of one example of how your own fear and panic growing up of certain things can translate to dislike or hating or rejection of another person. Did I explain that well enough?
Okay.
My question is going to be, do you feel that what's been the public services or public healthcare approach around this? Has it been, for example, at the moment there's a violence and knife crime epidemic going on, and lots of attention is going into that. What's the approach taken with chemsex? Are the authorities giving it the right attention, resources, etc.? Or is there further to go?
I think London is doing good, and that's because we've got quite a lot of activists, like some of them I can see in the room and Dorota next to me as well. But London's been great. We addressed it very early. We named it. Services like 56 Dean Street, rather than just sending someone to a heroin clinic, which is kind of what, fair enough, it seems like a logical thing to do. You're coming here for a sexual health screen, there's drugs involved, send them to the addictions clinic. So Dean Street very early on, in fact in 2010, said, nope, we're going to deal with it right here in-house. We're going to call it a chemsex service, and we know it's about gay sex. There's been a lot of noise, there's been lots of plays and theatre about it, thank you Chris. There's been documentaries and noise, and there are drag queens who name themselves after chems. There are drag queens who make sure that rather than just lip-syncing to a 1970s song while a lot of gay men get drunk and look for sex, that they actually use their platform to have discussions and dialogue around these things. So London has been a huge movement, and chemsex is now one of the directives within the government's drug policy. Other cities around the world, yeah, not so much. They're trying, but there's battles. That's why the word chemsex and defining the chemsex epidemic differently is so important. And not labeling the guys who use chems as drug addicts, but as guys who are struggling with a modern gay sex problem, and they're using drugs to manage it, and seeing that difference.
Okay, do we have any more questions? There is one there. Hi.
Just to pick up on that and reference to what I said earlier, have you seen any change in the way the Met Police and other police forces are dealing with some of the harsher aspects that can happen in this world?
Paul, you have the guys, the crime guys here.
Yeah, we had last week's Q&A was around crime, and we had Lord Brian Paddock, former Met Police, and also Stephen Morris, who works in sex crimes and chemsex in the probation services. So yeah, they certainly spoke of that sort of arena. However, they also spoke that there's lots of other things going on that are under the radar a lot more, that need a lot more urgent or are getting a lot more urgent attention. So the fact that Stephen's role was created 2 years ago, means that there is progress being made, but certainly I think it sounds like it's been delayed, just because this is quite a silent sort of thing even within the gay community. Not a huge number of us really know what it's all about. So that's the great thing about these sorts of productions, is that we're hoping that the awareness will be increased through the wider community, whether that be gay or non-gay. So, before we wrap up, any other questions?
Just
Yeah.
this is predominantly on the male gay population. What about women? Do they use that as well?
Really good question.
No, there's drugs or alcohol that's associated with lesbian sex, but it's a different looking epidemic. It's different drugs, different behaviours, different consequences. It doesn't have a name. No, it's not chemsexing. It's very different. It's not so much online. It's more I'm not the expert on it, but I think most of the research says that there's a lot of alcohol and marijuana that's associated with lesbian sex, and the issues to do with managing relationships more than managing a hookup culture on Grindr and stuff like that.
I'm going to coin it femsex.
We have this on video now.
There'll be a play about it in a year.
Alright, one last question up the back here.
I'm wondering, Dorota, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
How many of your clients are saying these things about chemsex being linked to intimacy? Or are they mostly saying it's about like mindless fun? Is it kind of like, are your clients quite honest with the intimacy, the connection aspect of chemsex? Or do they mostly come to you and say, this is just like drinking too much or having a wild mind or something?
Well, it's very difficult to generalize because for each individual and the couple as well, chemsex represents slightly something different. But I like the beginning of your question, the even opening. You already have an answer over there because you said something about the intimacy. You made a connection that a lot of us cannot make in the right time because we tend to mistaken intimacy for sex. So sex becomes intimacy. And it takes time for people to discover that intimacy is something much more. There is a bigger umbrella of vulnerability, of being held, of getting to know each other, of having a connection. And sex is just a part of it. And people are hungry for intimacy. But I think especially gay men struggle with the concept of how to do it. Because we all have our narratives. David just said about his narrative of a gay man who's a little bit camp. What was given to him, that was his blueprint of avoid, it's not really that great, until he could make sense of it for himself. You know, the main narrative that we all have is a heterosexual couple with 2 children and a dog, and a nice house in Hampstead Heath. So, do you know that Disney fantasy that I mentioned before? Very unachievable fantasy, that's the story. But it's very much the blueprint that we believe that this is how life should look like. So gay men, even sometimes very confident and open about their sexuality, they might find themselves slightly conflicted about what they're attracted to and they want to do and what they've been told they should do in order to achieve the happiness and make parents proud. You know, it was interesting for me that both of these characters escaped home in the age 16, both George and Anthony. I presume that there is a reason for that. And a lot of people struggling with camps comes because they didn't have an intimacy in their parental house as well. And that's the blueprint of the relationship, the very first connection that we tend to formulate towards our caregivers. And if they are slightly homophobic, even against their own will, there is a pretty good chance that I might struggle as well myself when I grow up. And this is what I see very often. It sometimes takes time to really pinpoint what my individual intimacy is. But it seems like people discovering that camps is just the illusion of intimacy, it makes them really disappointed because then they need to start all over again. And it's a hard work, but it's a good work, and it's very developmental work. I hope I answered that.
Yes, thank you very much.
All right, well, we're going to have to wrap it up there. Thank you very much, Dorota and David. So much information, and thank you all for your very inquisitive questions.